Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you're listening to Business Minds Coffee Chat. Lao Tzu is attributed with the quote, "Care about what other people think, and you will always be their prisoner." And Dr. Seuss said, "Be who you are and say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind." Well, on today's episode, we talk about FOPO and how it's impacting your life, overcoming the biggest barrier to unlocking your potential, finding mastery, and more. My guest is a husband and father, by trade and training, a high-performance psychologist, an author, nationally recognized speaker, podcast host, co-creator of the Performance Science Institute at the USC Marshall School of Business, and one of the world's leading experts on the relationship between the mind and human performance. He helps the best of the best achieve the extraordinary. His list of clients includes the Seattle Seahawks, Olympians, MVPs from every major sport, internationally acclaimed music artists, and Fortune 50 CEOs. You've seen him featured in major media outlets including NBC, Fox, ESPN, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, and Sports Illustrated. Please welcome the man whose purpose is to help people live in the present moment more often, Dr. Michael Gervais. Michael, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
What a warm welcome. Thank you for including me in your community.
Absolutely. I am so excited about our conversation today. So let's dive right in. I thought a good starting point for us today, Michael, would be for you to share what your favorite thing is about yourself and why.
That's such a great way to start. Favorite thing, that I'm a work in progress. And, if I look back on where I've come from and who I was when I was, 12 and 20 and 32 and 42, like I'm just so happy with the work that my loved ones in my community have held the standard for me and held the vision of who I might just be able to become. And so, yeah, I think that that's my favorite part is that I'm just trying to figure it out. And for me, um, there's just warmth in that statement.
I love that response. So with that said, as you look back over the progress that you have made up to this point, and then if you try to wind the clock back a bit, would you say that you are where you thought you were going to be in terms of progress at this point? Are you wildly further ahead than you thought? Give us a snapshot into what your imagination had allowed you to see.
That's a really cool way to frame it. I think I can do it best by stages. I do remember when I was 4, 5, 6 in that age range, we lived on a farm, and I was fascinated by the loudest thing that a kid on a farm, and I mean like 20 acres of land, would hear would be, it wasn't the tractors, it wasn't those things, but it was the trash truck. So the trash truck would come around once a week, and we lived on dirt roads. We didn't have street lights. There was none of that. And when the trash truck would come around, I'd come flying, outside, underwear, pajamas, whatever time of the morning it was, and I'm like, that is what I want to do one day. That is amazing. And so that never happened. So that could give you some hint that at an early age, that's what I was thinking would be special. And then I went through, let's call it from 6 to, I don't know, 26 in those years. I, I had no clue. I was bouncing around. I didn't have anybody in my family that went to college. And so I was the first person to go to college. And that happened almost by accident from a mentor of mine told my parents in high school, I think you got to kick him out. I think that he's kind of, he's run his course here. And if he doesn't have a bit of a hard pillow to hit, on his, to rest his head on, who knows how far he'll take, this kind of, I don't want to say delinquency, but just like apathetic, counterculture, you know, punk rock meets surfing approach to life. And so they did. They listened to him. And eventually, it led me to find college. And in college, I found three professors that one was a philosopher, one was a theologian, one was a psychologist. Sounds like we're going to walk into a bar and it's a really bad joke, but they were best friends and they saw me coming. And I didn't have the grades to get into a four-year university. I barely got out of high school, and this is why my parents were like, "It's time for you to make some decisions here, son." So I went to a community college, and those three professors, best friends, um, they saw something. They saw this kind of kid that was floundering, but had a bit of a spark about him because I had some energy now to push against the grain, and um, they said, "Hey, come here. I want to show you something." And they introduced me, this was in 1990, to the Stoics, to Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, to the Bhagavad Gita, to Erickson and Adler and Freud and, Maslow and all the psychologists that were influential to them. And I just fell in love with the world of the invisible. And so from that place, Jay, I had no clue what was next. I just kept pouring into this fascinating world of the invisible, the human experience. And it just kind of led me to one path to another. And I never wanted to work with pro athletes. That was not something I wanted to do. Spent the last 25 years working with some of the best in the world. What I wanted to do is work with people that were, at the time, looking back, I was borderline healthy. Notice I didn't say borderline unhealthy, like borderline healthy, obsessed with trying to understand the psychology of becoming. Not the psychology of dysfunction, but the psychology of like how do the best in the world work from the inside out? People that are flat out flourishing or people that are on the the razor's edge of excellence. One of those two. And I just wanted to work with people that were as committed to their craft as I was to mine. And it happened to be people that were on the frontier of human performance. So long, fun, windy way to say, no, I had no clue. And so I barely do now. And so one foot in front of the other, following the breadcrumbs, things that are interesting, and using my imagination to my best abilities, though.
So you're still on the journey of becoming then is what I'm hearing here, which I know we can all relate to that. So I'm curious since you mentioned stoicism and philosophy and some of the other things that you were learning from these three professors, when you were introduced to these topics, for you, were they esoteric or were they actually philosophies that you felt that there was some grounding with you personally, things that you could actually apply and put into practice?
I love that question too. I'm going to start backwards. So I'm licensed as a psychologist with a specialization in sport and performance, with a subspecialty, if there were such a thing, in consequential environments. Okay, so I went as far as you could in the formal education path, and then licensed on top of that. And if I start at the other end of the narrative, in high school, I took a intro to psychology course in high school, and I got an F in that course. I didn't understand a thing. I really did not understand it. It was both the material as it was written. It was my inability to grok with these weird concepts, and then the professor, I think, was probably half asleep as well. Not professor, but the teacher in high school. And so I kept that report card and I keep it in the DSM, the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual. So it's basically the list. It's a large book of all of the criteria for psychological diagnoses, and I keep it in there as a reminder that even when you don't understand something at one point, if you just keep chipping away and there's something there, like who knows? And when I was first introduced to the theories of the philosophies that I mentioned, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, I was astute in Christianity and some of the other folks. The professors brought it to life. I was interested in it, and then I remember it was in one of my theology classes. I like stood up and I couldn't control myself, and I said, "Doc, like." There's so much similarity between all 11 world religions. There's some that are very different, deity-based, non-deity, afterlife versus now, reincarnation or, heaven, that type of thing. And so I said, I think you could combine like the best of this one, the best of that one. And so he stops and kind of looks around to the class and he says, so here, Mr. Gervais, here we have a case of you thinking that you are just a little bit smarter than all of the founders of the 11 world religions. So I was like, no, that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say that. And so when you ask, was it confusing? I love finding threads in things. Like, what's the red thread between person A and person B, or person A, B, and C, and some sort of similar goal that they're going after. And so I share that with you because I started to understand it and want to apply it, so much so that I was bombastically put in place.
That is so great. What a fantastic story. First, thank you for sharing that. And as you were telling that story, I was thinking about my own journey through the world of religion and spirituality and Buddhism and all these other amazing areas to explore. And I found, like as an example with the Tao Te Ching, the first time that I was exposed to it, I had no idea what I was reading, right? I'm reading it. I wanted to understand it, but the reality is I wasn't ready for it as much as I wanted to be, and as much as I thought that I was, or that I was bright enough or worldly enough to understand it. I wasn't. And it's taken years and several times reading through it to really start to try to grasp what the meaning is. But, it's so interesting because with all of us, we're all in different stages, and the meaning that we take away from something like that can be it's very personal. It may mean one thing to me and something completely different to you. Do you agree with that, or push back
Oh,
on me
yeah.
if you don't?
Well, there is a universal truth that each of the 11 world religions are certainly pointing to. There's commonality and threads between them, and there's some differences, like we mentioned. But um, the 81 principles in the Tao Te Ching are amazing. They're pointing at something, and each time I read it, by the way, I don't read it by myself. I need to read it with others, and so I'll tell you a practice. Well, okay, let me tell you the story and then I'll come back to the question here. Is that so I live in the world of highly objective, observable, measurable outcomes, elite performance in both business and sport, and with adventure-based athletes that if they make mistakes, they could have the most unfortunate consequence, loss of a limb, loss of a loved one, loss of life. So they're very objectively observable environments. Some are harsh. In business, it can be harsh as well. Okay, so we've got that. And then I've got this deep respect for the scientific rigor. And I'm not going to waste somebody's time, if you will, in the world of performance if it doesn't work in the laboratory. It's got to first at least work there before we introduce it into environments of speed and accuracy. And then the third is this invisible world of, the esoteric philosophies of world religions and philosophers renowned. And so miring those three are actually quite challenging to me. And it was with the Seattle Seahawks when I was with them for 9 seasons. And every Saturday night, a handful of the coaches and I would sit down with the Tao Te Ching, and we would read. It was like three or four of us at a time, and we'd read it over the week. We'd talk about it in the hallways, and then Saturday night before Sunday, so it was after the team meeting during dinner, and we're always in the same hotel together, and we just go through it. Like, what'd you think? What did you think? What'd you think? And so I don't know what the 10,000 things are. I thought I knew what the 10,000 nameless things, but I don't know. Mike, what do you think? I go, I don't know. What do you think? And so it's just going through it with somebody else is so much richer. And so anyways, I'll pause there, and I'm sure I only a quarter of the way answered your question.
Well, and thank you for giving a bit more context around that. I think I can just share from my own experience that hearing you tell that story about being with the team of the Seattle Seahawks, right, coaches, etc., who are discussing this because there's a deeper meaning to it that applies to what they're doing, right, to living. And that to me is amazing that you're having these conversations with them. And I'm sure that those that are watching and listening right now are probably thinking the same thing. But, not to dwell on this, because quite frankly, I mean, I'm glad that we're talking about this. This wasn't necessarily the direction of the conversation, but the conversation is going to go depending on threads that we pull on, right? So, and I think it's important to bring this up. When you take the Seattle Seahawks as an example and the conversations that you were having regarding the Tao Te Ching, what was it about the reading? What was it about something specific that there was a curiosity and an interest there that would help them in performance, help them in the way that they show up to the world? What was it about those conversations that held so much meaning?
Oh, that's a cool question. Again, I'm really enjoying this. Thank you, Jay. Is that so? It's a little bit of an arc will help. Is that what we were trying to do? Head coach of the Seattle Seahawks and myself, we ended up building a business on the back of this idea. And what we tried to do was deploy the best practices of psychology inside the rhythm of practice, inside the rhythm of meetings. So we wouldn't have psychology be, oh, I should put an asterisk. Okay, let me put an asterisk here.
Okay.
Big business and modern business, for the most part, is about 15 years behind big sport when it comes to building the capabilities of the humans inside of it. So in business, we're about 15 years behind what's happening in sport. So I'm going back 15 years ago now. And it was very progressive for Coach Carroll to say, let's not just have a psychologist that we refer to. Let's do better than having a psychologist in the building. Let's partner. Let's take and deconstruct the psychology, the best practice of psychology, and put them in the rhythm of our day. So we're not doing mental imagery at the end of the day. We're not asking them to meditate later. We're not asking them to, work on their confidence after hours. Let's put it into the rhythm of business. So now fast forward. The reason that we got the Tao Te Ching was the first handful of years, we took the 5 basic mental skills and we trained all of the coaches on how to deliver those basic mental skills to the athletes that they were coaching inside the rhythm of practice, inside the rhythm of meetings. And so it wasn't like when I first started 25 years ago, my first pro team, the coach says, okay, Mike, oh man, we've been wanting someone like you. Okay, this is awesome. I got someone for you now. And if you can make a difference with this athlete, I'm telling you, he could be one of the greatest of all time, but he just can't get out of his way. And I'll point him out to you, and then I'll set up an introduction. But boy, if you could get something, whew, we'd be flying now. And so early on, I was like, okay, great. I, I can do this. Come to realize that like that person was a bit of a basket case, if you will. And the team knew that he was all talent and struggled with mental skills, not intelligence, but mental skills, being calm and confident and deep focus and optimism and so now when I'm walking down the hall with this athlete, what quietly was taking place, let's go back 25 years ago, psychology was not something that you prop up like, oh man, they're getting a competitive advantage now. Roger's getting a competitive advantage with Doc here. It wasn't that. It was, okay, if you're walking with Doc, you probably have a little bit of a mental problem. Yeah, let's stay away from Doc. So then like it was like this bad branding, bad labeling, bad like thing that was taking place. That's the way of the dodo now. That's not happening anymore, at least not in the progressive athletic programs. And we're going to start to see that in business as well, is that when you're doing work from the inside out, that's the first rule of mastery. That's why we titled the book that. When you're doing work from the inside out, when you're committing to work from your psychological base, you're now in a position of rich power in life, meaning that you're not whipped around by the external world. You know how to stand in your own space. You know how to be you. You know how to be at home with yourself wherever you are, whether it's a boardroom, whether it's a hallway conversation, whether it's a pitch meeting, whether it's recruiting, whatever it might be. And these tough conversations happen in living rooms too, sometimes bedrooms, but like, yeah, I see you're nodding. That's a funny joke. But psychologists are not.
Well,
so
I
funny,
know where you're coming from.
Yeah. So the idea is that, to be at home with yourself wherever you are takes time and practice and time under tension and practice and time and practice. And we can practice basic mental skills. So we did all of that work. And then some coaches were like, all right, what's next? I go, what do you want? Oh, we want to go to the source code. Like, what do you got? I go, well, there's 11 world religions. Like they're pointing at some source code. You want to start somewhere? And they say, how about that thing you've been talking about? Who's that Lao Tzu guy? Who is that? I go, yeah, let's start there. So that's how it started. And that was about 4 to 5 years into our arc of training psychology.
That is brilliant. And then I'm going to ask you just this one last question on this point, because I'm very curious. How did the information land? But let's go beyond the coaches. How did it land with the players? And just speak to how it was received. I'm very curious about that.
Well, it takes air cover, first of all. And that air cover comes from the people or person that has the most influence in the culture. And so when you're going to introduce anything new, change management 101, but certainly when it comes to creating the culture that you want, air cover and clarity of what is of value to this culture, to the person who holds, a great deal of power. And that, again, that power can come from an athlete or a coach. It can come from lots of different places. It can come from staff as well. First, it's air cover. And so this is how Coach Carroll says it. He goes, look here, at this organization, we're doing it better than it's ever been done before. That's our commitment. We are going to compete together to be our very best. And in doing that, we need to be great. We need to have disciplined minds. And we found a solution. And so when we're doing our work here, it's going to be about being great at our craft. We're going to have, big, fast, strong bodies, and we are going to be disciplined with our mind. And so, Doc, why don't you introduce yourself? And so that's kind of how it started.
Beautiful.
And so it's inside. This is where we've taken those best practices. Coach Carroll and I built a business on it. Once the pandemic hit, he stayed the track, which is a good track to be the head coach of the Seahawks. And I've taken the business full-fledged into organizations now, is to point directly at how do you put psychology in the rhythm of business. So it's not extra. Nobody has extra time, Jay. Nobody has extra. It's not disorder-based. There's a competitiveness. There's a investment in your people to be their very best. And I don't know another way without working from the inside out. And I think that that is the definition of the modern leader, is to understand how to apply the best practices of psychology, understanding how to apply it. Because we are psychological beings. We are physical beings. We are both form and formless. We are invisible and visible. And if we're only going to measure the visible, we're missing so much.
So
I
true.
mean, like that's saying like success is if you win. That's not the only measure of success. I'm reminded of a Olympian I spent time with where the national anthem was being played. She was crying, gold medal around her neck, and the whole world thought that she was like having these tears of joy, like I did it, da, da, reminiscing of all the challenge that she'd been through. She comes off of the podium and she says, "You see those tears?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, she says, "I thought I'd be different. I thought that I would like myself. I thought I would be okay with myself. I thought that I would feel different, but I'm still the same person. That this medal," and she points to it, she says, "that was on the table, um, didn't change any of me." And so outcomes are not enough. The external world is not enough. It has to go through filters. All the information outside of you has to go through your filter. And this is why you and I could go through the same experience. Let's say that I go through it and I filter it in a way where it is flat out traumatizing for me. And you filter it in a way that's like, "Oh, hold on. Whoa, that's heavy, but I see a silver lining in here." And you have post-traumatic growth and I have post-traumatic stress. And it might be part and parcel because of your genetic coding and your psychology. And again, my genetic coding and my psychology, it's both. And so the way we filter information, hold on, in my head, I'm ringing this bell, which is PTSD is not only a determinant of one's psychology. So people have PTSD, there's real reasons for it. And so my point about this is that it does need to go through a filter. And the more dynamic, more sophisticated, the more robust filter that we can build, the better we'll have at a go in life. I was not taught how to build that filter. I didn't learn it in grade school. I kind of learned it from my parents, but they dropped out. They're hippies, trying to just figure out life. They passed on some good wisdoms and some ideas. We gotta go study psychology to figure out how to build these radical filters for a flourishing life. And that's really what psychology is. It's the study of oneself, the study of how our minds, our thoughts, our feelings and emotions work and how they work hand in hand with each other. And until we make a committed study of self, we will be whipped around by the world around us. And that's in essence what we're trying to do here is reinvest this beautiful science into people who want to be their very best together.
This is such a powerful conversation. So a couple of things. First, as you're talking about this, the first thing that comes to my mind is Socrates, know thyself, right? But as you were telling that story about the Olympian and the medal around her neck and how the tears and what those tears represented, that story reminded me of what Maxwell Maltz talks about in Psycho-Cybernetics, if you've read that book, and what he discovered through the work that he was doing. Obviously, this was many, many years ago, but it just speaks to the psychology of the human experience. So fortunately, you have taken so much of your research and your wisdom and your insights and your stories and created an amazing book that I want to speak to here. And that is the first rule of mastery. You alluded to it just a moment ago, but the first rule of mastery, stop worrying about what people think of you. And I just want to share with our audience that this book, it's first of all, it's a science-backed book, right? It's really a guidebook on how we can overcome really the excessive worrying that we tie to thinking about what other people are thinking about us. I've been there before. I'm still there. I'm a work in progress. We talked at the beginning of the conversation about, this is a journey of self-discovery. And if there is one area, and you know this obviously through your research, but for everybody else, if there is one thing that absolutely can hold us back from reaching our potential, from taking that next step, from starting that business, from asking that incredible person out on a date, to anything else that we choose to do with our lives, it is that fear. It is that fear of what that person might be thinking about us. And I've done a lot of deep work on myself to work on how to overcome that. This was prior to your book. So the book is the great resource and the answer to that question. So I would love it if you would share with our audience, why was this book so important to you? Why now? And what was the process like for you to bring this book to life? That's a lot in one
Cool
question.
questions. No, those are cool questions. Let's land what this book is really speaking about. So the first rule of mastery is to work from the inside out. And it's a little tongue-in-cheek, almost like a little Easter egg that stop worrying about what people think about you is not the first rule. The first rule is to work from the inside out. And when you do that, you end up stopping worrying. You end up not being obsessed with what people might be thinking about you. And so we recognize this experience called FOPO, fear of people's opinion, as a bit of a culprit to many of the performance and wellness maladies that happen for people. And so this excessive worry, and our world right now has an unproductive obsession with what other people think about us. And there's an exhaustive attempt to try to interpret, what someone is thinking about us to avoid rejection or to get their approval. So that's really what we're pointing to is one of the greatest constrictors to human potential is the fear, the fear of people's opinions, the excessive worry about what they might be thinking. And the reason that is so powerful is that is part of the brain's dictum, is to figure out survival, to identify threat. And our ancestors passed on this coding that without even thinking, our body responds to a saber-toothed tiger, it responds to a wildebeest, and it responds to judgment and critique and potential rejection. Because when we were rejected from the tribe a couple 100,000 years ago, that was a near-death sentence. No different than a near-death sentence potentially if we didn't respond properly to the wildebeest. So we are so primed to make sure that we fit in because safety is belonging. And what ends up happening for people is if they don't invest in their mind, the brain wins. The brain is the hardware that sits in the skull, and that is optimized for survival. And it's so strong if you don't have a filter and if you don't have a software to run the program, you're going to do whatever it takes to fit in. And now we're just living on other people's terms. We are living at the whim of what they think we ought to say or do. And it is, there's a radical cost in business. I mean, obviously it sits at the center of mental health. So there's that feature of it, but it also has, it shows up with creativity and innovation by not speaking or having kind of that thing to push against the grain. There's groupthink and biases that are a culprit to this. There are an energy crisis that's taking care of people or taking over for people right now, a human energy crisis, where people are so exhausted, not only from the schedule, the relentless pace of work and the schedule, but the emotional navigation of it and trying to navigate, am I okay? Am I being accepted? Am I being rejected? Is a very expensive way to go through life. And so I can go on and on about, decreased risk taking or, lack of collaboration with other people because we don't want to be exposed. There's a decrease in productivity and engagement. We can go on and on, but the cost is high. And I'll just pause there.
So, when did you first come up with the idea to bring this book to life? How long had you been working on this? And as you're sharing that, the process of writing this book, there's a lot of research that goes into this. There's tremendous amount of insights, and a lot of this is really your own personal learnings and the work that you do day in, day out. So just speak to that process very briefly.
This story is not in the book, but I first recognized FOPO in two main ways. The first, I was 15 years old. I had just bought my car, saved up a couple summers to get my Mazda B2000 pickup truck. And I was driving and I could recognize that there was a car that was going in the same direction of me, but it was just traveling a little bit faster. And I knew they were going to come up on my left-hand side of the car, the driver's side of the car. And as they were coming up, close to where they would be able to see me, I remember I was straightened up. I grabbed the steering wheel, kind of had a cool lean on it, and I just wanted to look cool. And I thought, oh, they're going to look in here and see how cool I am in my new car. And I looked over right at the right time. They weren't looking. They were not interested in what was happening in my car. And I thought to myself in that moment, what am I doing? Like, who am I bullshitting here? Like, how? I don't know if you've ever had that experience, Jay, but like I had this awareness that I am absolutely full of shit right now. I just want to look good. And so I was embarrassed by that. And I didn't say anything to anyone. I didn't really talk about it because why would one do that? Especially if one was afraid, of or over obsessed with looking good. And so I didn't bring it up. And then I knew I was doing it too much, but I didn't know another way. And then I started listening to Best in the World, and they have a bit of it too. And I thought, oh my God, I'm not alone in this. So they don't talk about fear of failure being fear of injury or fear of the fear of failure for many, I should say, is letting people down. So that's like their opinion. It's looking bad in front of hundreds of thousands or millions of people. That's opinions. And so really it's this need to fit in, to be part of something that is at the core. And the fear of rejection is right at the center of, our bodies, going down the path of anxiety and our minds going down the path of anxiety. So that's part of the origin story. Those are the two parts. It was my own personal pain around it. And then the second is I started hearing it with Best in the World. I was like, oh, there's something here. So I wrote I wrote a article for Harvard Business Press. And they called basically 24 months later and it said, you were the number one downloaded article on HBR for 2 years in a row. Like,
Wow.
you hit a live wire. People see themselves in this obsessive worry about being okay. And so they said, please, we'd love to support you to write a book. And so that's how the book came to be.
Beautiful. So obviously this is not a new phenomenon, right? I mean, people throughout history have suffered with this. And in the book, I mean, you do share some great stories, some great examples. So share with us maybe one example of someone who you highlight in the book and how they suffered with FOPO.
Well, let's make sure that we can see ourselves in it. Like FOPO is not this thing, that is like for them over there. Like at some level, I think we all have FOPO because it is not all of us. Sociopaths, the enlightened, narcissists do not have FOPO. Okay, so if you're one of those three, you will not see yourself in what I'm about to describe. But FOPO is super slippery. It's checking your phone so that you'll appear like you're in demand or you're busy. It's laughing at a joke that you didn't find funny or you didn't get, but you don't want to be the weird one. It's holding a cocktail at a party, even though you don't want to drink, but you don't want to be the one that is different than others. Like it's subtle. And it's this shape shifting that takes place. Come to find out during my research is that even Beethoven had FOPO, one of the greatest of all time, the composer that has shaped. I don't know anyone that doesn't recognize like bum 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 bum, like we know Beethoven. And so come to find out, he started to lose his hearing. And it was so traumatic, and there was so much fear around how other people would see him for having being imperfect, for not being the greatest of all time. And how could somebody of the arts lose their hearing? What a shame. What a disgrace to, talent or whatever. Like he had this whole narrative. It drove him to the brink of suicide. And at early stages, he would pretend like he was in this creative rapture, is his name. This space that he would go into. He would be in his raptus, and he would pretend as if he had it all together, but he was just gripped by the creative process. But actually, he couldn't hear people. He couldn't hear when they were saying, "Hey, Beethoven. Hey, Ludwig. Hey, what do you think? You want to go to, get a dinner?" Like he just couldn't hear him. So he was so embarrassed by it that he created this almost alter, ego, or this alter personality. And then it became so overwhelming because his hearing was progressively getting worse that he went away, and he went away for a handful of years. And it's thought that at the point in which he embraced the in an honest way his condition, that the music inside of him became free. And that was when Symphony Number 5, bum, 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 that's when that happened. And it was said that he was on his piano so pissed off and like agitated and overwhelmed, and I'm sure sad, that he banged his fist on the piano. Like, why can't I hear? And it was like, wait, there's something there. Bum, 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 bum. And he turned it into Symphony Number 5. And then of course we get Symphony Number 7, one of the greatest of all time. And that was when he was completely deaf. So this points to like all of us. There is this fear that we walk around with of not being good enough. And we just put a name to it. And I would challenge your people and your community to see if they can see it in themselves. And I think it's a little bit like David Foster Wallace, the poet and writer, says, it's like the water that we're swimming in. It's everywhere. And, it's like The Sixth Sense, the movie. I see dead people, and before you know it, like you see them everywhere. I think that FOPO is that same way. Is once you recognize that there's this thing underneath the surface of just trying to be okay by fitting in, and we're terrified. That's why public speaking is so overwhelming. Is that there's nobody, very rarely, in the audience that's going to put you in a chokehold if you make a mistake, or do something physically harming if you have a bad showing. But the most dangerous thing in those moments when you're public speaking are the eyeballs. And it's what's behind the eyeballs, their opinion, their judgment, and their critique. The potential of rejection is so overwhelming because it's touching this ancient part of our circuitry in our brain. And that part of the brain is not optimized for modern day conditions. It is still trying to sort out, be at the middle of the pack. The wolves won't get you there. Just be in the middle of the pack.
So Michael, what is something that you didn't do, that you didn't move forward on at the time because of FOPO?
Oh, that's easy. It's what, in some respects, set me down this whole path. I just didn't know it was called FOPO. Is that I grew up in action sports, and this is a life trajectory that who knows how it would have been different for me. And I'm not bothered by it. I've got real peace around this. But I was unsettled about it for a long time. But I was 15 years old, good little surfer in Southern California. And I could do it under free conditions, like free surfing. I could pull into, heavy parts of waves and make those critical turns, and I could do it. But then as soon as competition would take place, and there was people on the beach that were literally judges and critics, and there was friends and family and those eyeballs that were watching, I couldn't even feel my surfboard. I was a disaster. Like it felt like I never surfed before. And to other people watching, they probably couldn't really tell, but I couldn't access the good stuff. And it wasn't until a surfer that I was out in the heat with one day, and he was an older, I was like a boy surfing against men, and he paddles by me and he says, Gervais, I surf with you every day out here. You got so much more inside you. He says, you got to stop worrying about all the shit that could go wrong. And he just paddles off. I thought, how does he know? How does he know that's all I'm thinking about is all the things that are disaster about me in this moment and what could happen later? And there was a bit of a lightning bulb, like looking back, it's easy to see it, but it was a lightning bulb moment where it was like, man, I got to do something about my mind because it's not working in the right way for me. And so that was, I couldn't stay in the competitive surfing world long enough to give myself a chance because I was afraid of what other people were going to be thinking of me. And I know what it feels like to not be able to access what you know you have inside you. And I hope that people hear this and they don't go, oh, poor Mike. That they go, yeah, me too. I know what that feels like too. Like I get tongue tied or I get flustered or I get over emotional and then I walk away from a conversation. I'm like, what did I just say? Like that's why I think that this idea is really important. Is that so many of my loved ones and people I know and professional athletes, Beethoven too, they've struggled with this.
Absolutely. Well, that story definitely lands with me. I know that I feel it. It resonates, and I know our audience listening right now can definitely feel and relate to that too and have their own story of the impact that that's had on their lives. So for all of you that are watching and listening right now, obviously we're going to provide a link to purchase this incredible book. And keep in mind that not only is there great research, great stories, strategies, right? There are strategies in this book that are going to help you. This is truly a great guidebook. So we'll go ahead and link to that in the show notes. So
thank you, Jay.
Absolutely. So Michael, as we are wrapping up the conversation, just a couple quick questions here for you. One is what is the greatest gift that life has given you that you didn't realize at the time?
Well, the easy would be, the birth of my son. But I had a sense that, people for a long time have talked about how great parenting is and how hard it is. The greatest gift is, people used to ask me early in my career, like, is there a red thread for the best in the world? Like, what are the commonalities between the best in the world? And it set me down a path to try to understand it. And I haven't found one yet. But I can tell you that there is a red thread that might not be universal, but it's important. And I recognize it in my own life. And it's the relationship with my wife. And having a life partner that has, first and foremost, they need to be attractive, the physical bit is really important. So that part is cool. But like having somebody that's attractive to you and they see you and they're committed to helping you be your very best and to do it in a way that can be felt and experienced, I don't know a more powerful decision, which is the decision of who you partner with. And so you can do amazing things as a lone wolf. No, strike that. You can go pretty far as the heroic one, but you go farther and you probably will go faster when you've got people with you that are in your corner. So that's the one that I didn't quite realize the potency of the decision. I was 25 when I got married, and I had no clue. And looking back now, we've been married just about 30 years. That it's like, damn, that is cool. That is really cool.
That's a beautiful response. I know my wife is going to appreciate that when she listens to this episode. So here is my final question to you. What are one to two bigger questions that you're asking yourself today, bigger questions that you're contemplating?
Yeah. I'll do, it's a big one, but it's going to feel narrow. And then I'll do like a big one. Okay. So the big one that's narrow is, um, did I do enough today? Like, did I really give it a go? And that to me means, did I get to my edges? And did I do it in a way that is becoming to the values and virtues that I hold with high regard? And so, like that, that requires effort to get to the edge. And so that's one that, because that it ladders to the second big one, right? The big one, if you will, is my purpose, is to help people live in the present moment more often. And the reason that is the case is because that's where everything that is beautiful and amazing is experienced. It's where we feel pain, and it's through pain that will change. So the present moment's important there. It's where wisdom is revealed, and it's where high performance is expressed. So the present moment is the keyhole. And if I can help people, 1 in 5 people, to be more specific, in whatever community that I'm in, just increase the frequency of time that they spend in the present moment, this vision I have, this compelling future that I hold for the future, is a world where people are flourishing. And like, if we don't need that word right now, I don't know when, it'll be more important than right now. Um, People are struggling and suffering, and there's war as the time we repeat or are recording this. And so holding that vision, a place where people flourish, and it's 1 in 5 of the community, 1 in 5 people in the communities that I spend time with, for them to just have the way to practice being in the present moment more often. Essentially, that's what this book is about. And essentially, that's where all of the psychological practices that I point to are so important, is so people can live in the present moment more often.
Very powerful questions to ask ourselves. And I know that through your conversation, through our conversation today, your words, your wisdom, your insight that you've shared, that you're definitely impacting that 1 in 5 people, if not more, in this community.
Yeah.
And Michael, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on
Cool.
Business Minds Coffee Chat. I'm truly grateful for the opportunity to invest time together and for you bringing this incredible book to life. And again, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And I do have a quick favor. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That helps our podcast grow and expand its reach and attract amazing guests, just like Dr. Michael Gervais. And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button, and until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure you pick up a copy of The First Rule of Mastery and apply the lessons you learn, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.